and welcome back to another episode of the Wizard Factory podcast, where you subscribe for weekly videos exploring deeper knowledge of the universe and yourself. My name is Logan Hart.
And I'm Brian Easterday.
You know, you've seen those bumper stickers, the one that says Coexist, and it's got all the little symbols of the different religions of the world. And what this really is signifying, in a word, is Omnism, which is defined as the recognition and respect of all religions or lack thereof. Doesn't that sound nice? Isn't that just a nice thing, you know? But we're going to dig into this and maybe look at some of the positive and the negative of this. We're not necessarily just trying to come out and demonize this concept in general, but we want to look at why it's true, but really kind of only half true.
Yeah, so like I said, like Logan said, on the surface, this sounds like a very wonderful idea. I myself kind of bought into it for a long time. And it's also kind of seen from the perspective of saying that there's like truth in all religions, and not just having any one. And to some extent, I can't agree with that, of being able to look at the perspective of being able to see value and not just having one specific religion or practice that you have, like kind of working from an eclectic perspective, so to speak. But at the same time, the idea that all belief systems are, inherently something that has value or goodness in them, I think can be a very dangerous slope. As history has shown itself time and time again, when there's certain belief systems accepted, it becomes very dangerous, and all sorts of things, torture and genocide and the destruction of other cultures has happened time and time again, coming more or less from specific belief systems. So the idea that you should be looking for truth or the good things in religions that have a long history of anything but that is that's a very kind of dangerous thing, because it sets you up for coming from a place of tolerating too much. Like, there is a point when tolerance is no longer a good thing. So we're going to really be delving into where that is. So we're not totally demonizing this belief system or this mindset, but we think it should be looked at very carefully.
Yeah, very well said. So, and by the way, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button. We really appreciate that. And if you like this type of content, hit the like button as well. So with this in mind, we're going to be really kind of approaching this as we do from our pagan and animist mindset, very open-minded mindset. And to really understand what we mean, we've been covering this a lot more, especially recently. So go back the last few episodes and really look at our exploration of these concepts such as animism and paganism, so that you understand where we're coming from with this. But it's really just that laissez-faire, so to speak, approach or mindset of your own individual path and working with the practices, the tools, the concepts, everything that works for you specifically, and not imposing that on anyone else by to me, it's a sign of arrogance, of thinking that your way is the only way and that everyone else should just be forced to do it just because it works for you. And so with that said, we kind of look at the first big idea around this, which is intolerance. And to do that, we're going to look at the forms of intolerance. So really kind of juxtaposing verbal or conversational discourse versus violent crusade and unsolicited evangelicalism. That is a very important distinction that we're kind of dissecting in this. So terms like crusade, jihad, obviously, these are evangelical concepts of pushing your own belief through either a militant perspective or just all around antagonistic and imposing, whether just sharing the ideology, or even literally bringing about by way of the sword. What your opinions are, that's pretty much just generally unacceptable behavior from a human being. It's immoral. And these things do not exist in pagan cultures. There is no jihad, there is no crusade, there's no word for such a thing, because that's not even a part of their thinking at all.
One, even in cultures that Christians would consider pagan, but you not so much like in the sense of like a European paganism, but even like within Taoism or Eastern cultures, you don't really, you do find it with certain sects of Buddhism that can be like that, but for the vast majority, like within the Hindu culture, things like that, it's not this. There's no idea of just going out and forcing your belief system on others. It's quite the opposite. Specifically, even within Hinduism, they're very open to adapting new archetypes into their pantheon. In fact, a lot of Hindus will actually have pictures of Christian saints or Jesus, and it's not because they're Christian. They'll just be like, oh, I like what that person said, or they'll look at it from that point and they just incorporate it into their pantheon. That's really where the animist and pagan mindset very much differs from, say, like the Abrahamic mindsets, specifically more so Christianity and Islam. The vast majority of the world's religions are not evangelical in nature. They would fall under the animist term. That would explain them, even though they all have their own individual understandings. But you see with monotheism in Christianity and jihad, there is a element to it that they're very evangelical by their very nature. So we're going to look at a lot of different perspectives and ways that we can see that. And it might get a little lengthy, but it's to really demonstrate very clearly the point that there are some belief systems that are very dangerous. They have a long history of being proven dangerous, because that's also something that we should look at. Is we can't say that, oh, this is what people intended, or the excuse that people use is, oh, they weren't real Christians, or whatever that is. That you have to look at how the actions actually played out in history. So we're going to be getting into a lot of this and things, and then we'll also be looking not only at Christianity and things, but into some other belief systems as well, to kind of get a good holistic perspective on this concept.
Right. So one thing that we can observe here that to me is just a hallmark, an absolute hallmark of cult-like mentality, and that is polarizing language and cultivating a us and them dichotomy. So again, you see this kind of Jews and Gentiles, infidels, non-believers. These kind of words are very common in religious vernacular. And again, pagans have no word for this sort of thing. They don't care what you believe or what you follow. They care that you treat them with respect. And that's really what that comes down to. So nothing like this exists in the animist mindset. But it's the same exact tactics that they use in politics, Republicans, Democrats.
Yeah, it's to me, it all comes back down to creating that divide, not only with individual, but like within society itself. Because when you're coming from the perspective of seeing something as different than you, to the point that you're trying to demonize it, like, oh, it's now good and evil, it's God and Satan. That's a totally different thing than from like the animist perspective of, you see that someone may have a different belief system than them, but you're not looking at it as, oh, that's evil now. It's just different than yours. So those are two very different world views to operate from. When you're just recognizing something as different and it's just as beautiful as your belief system, there's nothing wrong with it. That's a very healthy worldview to go through. But when you're seeing everything other than your worldview as satanic or evil or demonic, or something that needs to be eradicated and destroyed because you're in this spiritual battle, well, that's very dangerous. So yeah, that's really, the two different mindsets that we'll be getting into here.
Right. And I guess you could say, just for the record, if you're considering the three Abrahamic religions, that I'll concede that Judaism is the least militant or evangelical, but the context for that is actually quite interesting. Would you like to expand on that, Brian?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in Judaism, they look at God very differently. It's more of a relationship of trying to keep him at bay, so to speak. So in that sense, that they don't feel the urge to be evangelical or to go try to spread their religion around. Now it's interesting to bring this up because uh, you have Second Temple Rabbinical Judaism, which is really kind of the sect that Christianity developed out of. It was a more radical sect that first tried to then, take over Judaism. That didn't really work, and then it ended up appealing to the Roman state, and things like that, and spread that way. So that is very interesting to note that even though there are the three Abrahamic religions, Judaism, generally isn't very evangelical. It really is more of Christianity and Islam that tend to be that way.
Right. And so another thing that we can look at here is that we're just, we're speaking in general terms about any belief system that is fundamentally intolerant, militant, and dogmatic. Or that is to say, incompatible with freedom and sovereignty. And we've discussed this a bit on this channel, actually, but we're actually going to get more in depth on those aspects a little bit later in this episode. But next, Brian is going to read two quotes from two different figures from the, what would you say, the post-Christian era. In other words, somewhere between when Christ was allegedly lived to the time when Christianity was actually taking hold and starting to spread.
So
one of the quotes is from a pagan and the other is from a Christian, and just taking these two quotes and comparing them, I think really paints a very big picture of what we're ultimately saying with this episode.
Right. So where this is coming from, the book The Darkening Age by Catherine Nixie. If anybody you want to get deeper into the history of early Christianity and its effect on the classical pagan world, this is an absolute must read. It's an amazing book. There's a few short passages that we're going to get into it and read from, but this really sets up. This is at the very beginning of the book, and the time period that it's coming from is it's coming from Athens. Both of these people were in Athens around the time of like 532 AD. So a couple hundred years after Christianity started getting its power from the state through Rome and everything. So this is when it's really kind of starting to take hold heavily, and being enforced. So the first quote is from the pagan author, I believe it's pronounced Symmachus. But
Symmachus.
It says, or Symmachus, yeah, there we go, yeah. So it says, we see the same stars, the same sky is shared by all, the same world surrounds us. What does it matter what wisdom a person used to seek for the truth? Obviously that's a very open, mindset. He's saying it doesn't matter what pantheon of gods you use. There's not a good and evil. The next quote is from Saint Augustine, one of Christianity's, patron saints. It says that all superstition of pagans and heathens should be annihilated is what God wants, God commands, God proclaims. Very short, like no qualms about it, like where his stance is. One of them is, a very open mindset of not really caring what specific belief you has. The other is saying that anything that is not this, that it is, you're commanded by God to go destroy it. That's it just really highlights the difference between the two. And that's why, just being accepting of any belief system can obviously be a very slippery slope. Logan, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I definitely think that it doesn't get any clearer than that. The sort of juxtaposition of these two perspectives, and it's almost as absurd as saying anyone who doesn't drive a Ford, I should go and like destroy their car or burn it or something like that, because one person is saying, well, wait, what? If the car works and it gets you from point A to point B, what difference does it make what kind of car you drive? If you like it, if it works for you, then power to you. And the other one's saying, no, if it's not Ford, it's garbage and it's an abomination and it needs to be destroyed. I mean, that sounds crazy, and yet that's literally no different than what this is ultimately putting forth as well. So
Right. Yeah. It's just, I think that's one of the great things she did in this book is just in the very beginning highlighting the different mindsets, and those two quotes did I think a very wonderful job of that. So the next little passage I kind of wanted to read, I'll give a little background context to, and then I'll read the passage. So this is coming from like the story of some of the last great philosophers seeking out from Athens, because literally like any kind of philosophical debate or religious debate in public had been outlawed. If they found you worshiping any of the old gods or practicing any pagan religion, you could literally be executed. So this was a band of 7 men that were they literally went back in an unbroken chain to like Plato himself. So a long history of people of thought and questioning things, that the idea of only having one belief system or forcing that on anybody is just, would have been unheard of to these people to try to do that. So they're then fleeing and trying to escape this persecution from Christianity. And then there's a passage in the book here that I thought kind of stuck out, and it really highlighted a certain point to me. So I'll go ahead and read it. It says, "This was no time for the philosopher to be philosophical. The tyrant, as the philosophers put it, was in charge and had many alarming habits. In Damascus's own time, houses were entered and searched for books and objects deemed unacceptable. If any were found, they were removed and burned in triumphant bonfires in town squares. Discussion of religious matters in public had been branded a damnable audacity and forbidden by law. Anyone who made sacrifices to the old gods could, the law said, be executed. Across the empire, ancient and beautiful temples had been attacked, their roofs stripped, their treasures melted down, their statues smashed. To ensure that the rules were kept, the government started to employ spies, officials, and informers to report back on what went on in the streets and marketplaces of cities and behind closed doors in private homes. As one influential Christian speaker put it, his congregation should hunt down sinners, drive them into the way of salvation as relentlessly as a hunter pursues his prey into nets." There's quite a bit in there that you could look at from the mindset. Obviously, it's extremely dogmatic. It's not accepting of any other kind of free thought. But it also shows that the history of Christianity in the state, being brought up, speaking from my own personal perspective and experience, and Logan, I'm sure you had this as well. We were very much taught, Christianity in its early history, that Christians were just persecuted by the Romans, and it was really hard to be a Christian, and you were many times killed for your beliefs. When you actually look at the history of it, it's kind of the opposite of that. They really would seek out martyrdom. Like the early Christians, they were really insane people. They would do absolutely horrible things to themselves, even as punishment. They had a very dark worldview, and a lot of people aren't familiar with that. But then, once they got within power with the state, once Constantine decided, this would be a really great religion for people that would, be soldiers, for their army. If you think the world's a terrible place and you're just, ready to die because you want to go to heaven, that works well for soldiers. Like that's they'll just do whatever they're told, and then they'll die thinking they're going to get some reward. So it became very useful. But then as soon as it really started taking power, within 50 to 100 years of that, laws were being passed banning anything that wasn't Christian. They started immediately, like, this was saying, they were literally going into people's homes, and taking any scripture, any kind of, it could have even been some satirical, like, comedy, or something from a poet, nothing even of a necessarily religious, but it like spoke about sex, or it spoke about, something those evil pagans, human beings do, and they would just burn all those, and they'd smash people's statues. So it was very much forced through violence. It wasn't this being passed on through charity or love and light, or anything like what mainstream academia kind of versions of history has pushed. So I thought that passage was really good at kind of summarizing that.
Mm-hmm.
So this next one is coming out of a chapter that says, like, the battleground of demons. So again, it's a really good passage for highlighting the difference in the mindset. It says, the old laissez-faire Roman ways, in which the worship of one God might simply be added to the worship of all others, were, preachers told their congregations, no longer acceptable. Worship of a different God, they explained, and you were not merely being different, you were demonic. Demons, said the clerics, dwelt in the minds of those who practiced the old religions. Those who criticized Christianity warned the Christian apologist Tertullian that were not speaking with a free mind. Instead, they were attacking Christians because they were under the control of Satan and his foot soldiers. The battleground of those fearsome troops was nothing other than your minds, which have been attuned to him by his secret insinuations. Demons were capable of taking possession of men's souls and to block up their hearts, so to stop them from believing in Christ. When you think about that, it's a bit radical. It sounds insane that people would actually kind of, buy into something so extreme. But it, as we mentioned earlier, I mentioned with the example of Hinduism, how they would actually incorporate, a different, deity or archetype. In fact, a lot of, like I mentioned, they've even incorporated, certain Hindus will have, Christian saints or, Jesus, a picture of him somewhere in their home or on their altar. This is coming from the perspective of, like, that was no longer allowed. So it just really highlights the difference between, the animist or the pagan mindset that was a very tolerant mindset versus this other mindset that was everything but. And, it's kind of two extremes, because we do want to highlight that, maybe that's if there was a mistake that paganism made along the way, it was kind of being too accepting of, some of these radical people, like when they were coming in and cutting down sacred groves or destroying temples, maybe they should have, just, got dealt with. But that didn't happen, because they were just looked at as like crazy people. Like, why would you do that? Like, for, a lot of times, like, if they would come through and destroy a temple or something, pagans would just try to put it back up, or they try to put a statue back up. But, and that's still happening to this day. There was an event, just a few weeks ago we talked about on a previous episode, where some idols had been put up and they were chopped down within a few weeks. But they can be put back up. But when they start, when Christianity started getting power from the state, it became illegal to do so. You could lose your life for doing that. So, is very forcibly a stance of not accepting any other mindset. And you can't tolerate a belief system like that, because it's not going to tolerate anything other than itself. So it comes down to, there's a point that you have a right of self-defense, both physically and spiritually as well. And that's what we're really trying to highlight in here. So this next little one, to set it up a little bit, they were kind of talking about, in the very beginning when Christianity, started taking hold through the state, through, Constantine, that there was, the emperor still kind of had what the early Christian, saints and things would have considered, pagan beliefs, or pagan practices, that, they were very, sexually promiscuous, or they might still have statues, or, whatever it may be. So then this kind of next passage is kind of addressing that specific kind of issue. So it starts off, it says, such behavior might be overlooked in an emperor, but it was not what the bishops wanted. In sermon after hectoring sermon delivered by this new generation of rigidly unbending preachers, the people's choice was made clear. In deciding who to worship, congregations were not choosing between one God or another. They were choosing between good and evil, between God and Satan. To allow someone to follow a path other than the true Christian one was not liberty, it was cruelty. Freedom to err was, Augustine would later vigorously argue, freedom to sin. And to sin was to risk the death of the soul. The possibility of sinning, as one pope later put it, is not freedom, but slavery. To allow another person to remain outside the Christian faith was to not show praiseworthy tolerance, it was to damn them. I mean, it's like, isn't that just, it really is an insane mindset when you think about it, and very arrogant, like you mentioned earlier, to think that like your belief system is so correct that you literally have to, the best thing you could do for a person is even force them through violence, if need be, to convert to your faith. That's insane, really. And I mean, look how anti-sovereignty it is fundamentally. The freedom to err was the freedom to sin. What is, cosmic law is all about being able to understand cause and effect through making mistakes many times, especially like we look at archetypes associated with like Saturn, or like with Rahu and Loki, that trickster archetype. I've definitely learned some very valuable lessons from that trickster archetype. And this is not acknowledging any of that. It's saying, in fact, like that's a horrible thing. That's slavery if you allow someone to believe what they want. Like it has to be this. It's
definitely a very strong form of gaslighting too, because
yeah,
it's projecting that internal conflict, I guess, because it must have been imposed on you, whether you were raised teaching it or you got conquered and were forced to convert or whatever, and now you have to pass that abuse on to other people, but in some twisted way, thinking that you're saving them. I mean, it's so insidious and unhealthy, of a mindset in general. And I mean, ultimately, I think what it comes down to is it dehumanizes non-believers, because it's like the only way to even claim your humanity is to subjugate yourself to the Sky Daddy and the Savior in order to earn your humanity, basically. Otherwise, you're like, I mean, and they said this a lot, just comparing pagans to, wild beasts and things like that. I mean, it really is very dehumanizing and just all around harmful.
Right. Yeah, and that again, that came, because it came out of Judaism, where there was the idea of the chosen people and the Gentiles. There's God's chosen people and Gentiles, and then of course when that gets taken to a militant perspective, it's a poison foundation from the very beginning when you start really looking into the history of it. But yeah, it's savior projection. That idea that you need to be saved, but then you project that onto everybody else, and then the idea that because someone has a different belief system that they're actually demonic, and of course they can't be in their right mind, because anybody that thinks differently than me, they just have to be controlled by a demon. There's that is people like that, those are the kind of people that you would like put in the the mental asylum. But yet these are the founding saints and forefathers of Christianity that people will say that, oh, they were such great people, or oh, they did these wonderful things. And when you start to read about these people, you realize that they were total fucking nutbags. Like that shit, there's no way around it. They were out of their minds. They did, you know, horrible things to themselves.
Well,
You know,
yeah, trauma will do
other
that to
people.
a person. And so when they're
Right,
under
exactly.
the fear of coercion via eternal damnation of the soul,
Yep.
then now they've actually accepted as truth the fact that if they don't fulfill their moral obligation to spread the religion and impose that onto other people, then now their soul is further at risk. And of course, they don't want the fiery hell and damnation, which they believe in, that the people that they're trying to save don't even believe in. I
Hmm.
mean, it's cyclical.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It, you know, so again, you know, you can really start to kind of see this mindset. So we have like two more passages to kind of, you know, really highlight this and give a few more examples, and then we'll move on to some other things. So this next one I'll go ahead and read. You know, this came from you know, a Christian leader here, you know. So it says, to oppose another's religion, to repress their worship, these were not, clerics told their congregations, wicked or intolerant acts. They were some of the most virtuous things a man might do. The Bible itself demanded it. As the uncompromising words of Deuteronomy instructed, and ye shall overthrow their altars, and break their pillars, and burn their groves with fire. And ye shall hew down the graven images of their gods, and destroy the names of them out of that place. The Christians of the Roman Empire listened, and as the 4th century wore on, they began to obey. You know, and yeah, I mean, it's just very clear. You know, like and this is one thing that I guess we can kind of highlight here, is that Christianity in the modern day, people will kind of do this cherry picking with Christianity. Though when you look at it historic, you know, through history of how it was actually played out, of how people actually believed it and then acted upon that, it was always a very literal religion. And you know, the Abrahamics were really the first religions to do that. You know, you know, you don't see in, for example, in the Norse tradition, us saying, you know, that, you know, Ymir was killed by Odin and his brothers on a certain date, and that created, you know, like that's, we understand it's an allegorical myth. You know, it's not this literal kind of belief system. But Christianity has been taken and applied as a literal belief system. So when we're analyzing it, this is the perspective that we're analyzing it through. As I mentioned before, we see kind of a lot of people, especially like people that tend to lean towards Gnosticism or things like that, that will try to cherry pick the Bible. But you know, I don't really think that's being intellectually honest. You know, like if the religion is, you know, through history been pushed as it's claiming that it's historical, that this Jesus character was a real person, which, you know, there's no historical evidence that's another episode. Like, then to just go through and cherry pick the good little things that you like and not acknowledge any of the other bullshit in it, that's not really being, you know, totally honest. And that's kind of the reason I'm bringing that up, is that's really what the Omnist mindset kind of will tend to do. It's just looking for the truth in all religions. But if there's a belief system that also has a lot of extremely destructive, self-harming beliefs in it, that's not, it's a poison cup. You shouldn't be drinking from it. Just, you know, drink from a clean source, you know, would be a way to look at it.
It certainly discredits the validity of a thing. You know, you have to look at something in its entirety. If something is self-proclaiming as this exclusive and wholly perfect pathway to heaven or whatever have you, you shouldn't have to cherry pick from that. And if you did, why wouldn't you start to question the overall integrity of the message? If there's things that, oh, well, that sounds nice, love your neighbor, okay, I can get behind that. And wait a minute, you stone your daughter when she had, you know, marriage before wedlock, or just all these other barbaric things. And of course, yeah, we can get into the Christian doctrine that Jesus died for humans so that we didn't have to follow the old law. That's what they actually believe, is that the old law of Exodus and Numbers and all that, Leviticus, became obsolete. Well, any true a student of truth that actually understands natural law morality knows that morality doesn't change based on what year it is. Nothing can change a moral or an immoral action into a moral action. So some things happen and this and that, and now suddenly something that was moral became unnecessary. Or I mean, it points it out to me as just arbitrary dictates of a psychopathic control freak God that just makes up rules and then says, oh, I got bored with those, you don't have to follow them anymore. But used to, I would have killed you for it. But now I killed my son, he saved it, it's all good, you know, let's move on. How does that make any sense?
It's nuts. So yeah, we've got, you know, I'll read the last little passage here that kind of like as a kind of little like final little bit out of this book. You know, the reason we're selecting this too is because this book, it really is an excellent source, you know, so I really do hope people go and purchase it and read it, because it, you know, it was very, very well done for sure. So I'll go ahead and read this last passage. It says, Christian observers would look on the tolerance of their non-Christian neighbors with astonishment. Augustine later marveled at the fact that pagans were able to worship many different gods without discord, while the Christians, who worshiped just the one, splintered into countless warring factions. Indeed, many pagans like Celsus seem to actively praise plurality. To the Christians, this was anathema. Christ was the way, the truth, and the light, and everything else was not merely wrong, but plunged the believer into demonic darkness. To allow someone to continue in an alternative form of worship or a heretical form of Christianity was to not allow religious freedom. It was to allow Satan to thrive. Augustine, despite being impressed by the harmony of his neighbors, was not willing to extend such tolerance himself. It was, he concluded, the duty of a good Christian to convert heretics by force if necessary. This was a theme to which he returned again and again. Far better a little compulsion in this life than eternal damnation in the next. People could not always be trusted to know what was good for them. The good and caring Christian would therefore remove the means of sinning from the uncertain reach of the sinner. For in most cases we serve others best by not giving, and would injure them by giving what they desire, he explained. Do not put the sword in a child's hand, for the more we love anyone, the more we are bound to avoid entrusting to him things which are occasion of dangerous faults. You know, so again, it really sums up that they were literally astonished at the fact that the pagans could worship different gods and that they could get along, that they did so without discord. There was no, oh, my God's better than your God, or oh, I have to go destroy the statue. But yet the Christians who had the one true God would split into many different factions. You know, this was something St. Augustine was observing himself. You know, and we see that with Christianity. There's literally, you know, thousands and thousands of different sects, and they war amongst themselves. So we could see that with Catholicism and the Protestants. You know, that there was a lot of bloodshed for a long time over who was correct. And that's just showing you that it's fundamentally a dogmatic belief system. It's coming from trauma-based mind control and self-loathing and just hatred of being a human being. You know, like things like sexuality were things that early Christianity just really despised, you know, and they did literally spent centuries trying to eradicate any of that. You know, a great example of how that actually was prevented was with the city of Pompeii and its discovery in the late 1800s. Because the way it, you know, with the volcanic ash, it was so sudden, the way the city had been preserved, that, you know, it hid it from the Christians for a long time. So then by excavating it, then you started to see all these murals and, you know, this artwork on the walls of the city of people, you know, having sex and, you know, all sorts of different positions and things. That was something that Christianity would have tried to, they literally would have just destroyed it and chiseled it away, and we wouldn't have had a record. But that was like a time capsule that it let us look into the pagan mindset. And when you look at it, you see that it's just people being human beings. Like, it's just observing like the beauty of life, and each person has their own belief system or whatever they're doing that's working for them, you know, so long as they're not hurting others. So, you know, that's kind of, you know, it's just really amazing to me just how vastly different those two different mindsets are.
And we can observe this concept of dogma moving into the next section here. I think just to start off with a verse from the scriptures themselves. In fact, some of the highly heralded Ten Commandments, which is obviously a core foundational set of rules for Christianity and what they deem to be righteous or moral by following these 10 commandments as guidelines. The Exodus 20 verse 3 says, "You shall have no other gods before me." So right therein, it's very clear that if you're not venerating and worshiping and more importantly obeying this one God Jehovah, you're breaking the highest commandments essentially.
Mhm.
And go ahead.
If I'm correct, I do believe as well that somewhere in there when he's explaining this, it's, you know, if you do this or you worship another god, he'll actually punish the third and fourth generation after, you know, you. I believe that's somewhere in there. Which, I mean, think about that, like a god that's giving like such a, like, you're only going to worship me, and, you know, if you don't, not only will I punish you, but I'll punish the, you know, the third and fourth generation after you, like, you know, children that people that had literally didn't even, you know, didn't do anything, you know. That's, and this is supposed to be, you know, the one true God, or this loving God. You know, it doesn't line up. It's gaslighting. You know, I mean, imagine like you know, in a person like in a domestic like violent situation, you know, like, and the guy's, you know, beating, you know, he's just like literally beating and punishing the woman or something like that. But then, you know, at the same time saying, you know, oh, I love you. Like, oh, I'm the only one that cares for you. Like, you know, like that. It's a gaslighting. And, you know, that's what Christianity ultimately really is spiritual gaslighting. Uh, and you can see this over and over again. So just the fact that is a core commandment is something that it's a foundational belief. So, you know, when you see that's what this is built off of, you have to really start to be honest with yourself and recognize, like, oh, is this actually such a virtuous belief system as we've been told, or are we just doing this because, you know, we're afraid to say anything bad about Jesus, or we're afraid to, you know, say that Christianity and anarchy and sovereignty they're not compatible. You know, that's another future episode we'll get into. But, you know, we just really have to start being honest with ourselves, and not just with Christianity even. You know, we'll get into, there's other belief systems, but really looking at things honestly and then seeing how those play out, you know, what their effects are when people operate from those mindsets.
Mm-hmm. Right. And, you know, getting back to this idea of dogma, the actual definition of dogma is defined as principles or rules that cannot be questioned. A principle or set of principles laid down by an authority as incontrovertibly true. So again, looking at these 10 commandments, well, that is verbatim a set of principles that cannot be questioned. They were handed down by God on high to Moses on the mountain, and he brought them down on the tablets and said, "This is what God gave me. We have to live by this." I mean, it's pretty unmistakable. That is dogma by definition. And then within that, it's, you know, it's saying you shall have no other gods before me. You're highlighting that it's a jealous God. It's angry.
Mm-hmm.
These aren't
Yeah.
really admirable attributes, in my opinion.
Yeah, when you look at like how Christianity has like presented itself, and like if you look at some of those passages and those quotes from like St. Augustine, the mindset that he's operating from is very much it's a dogmatic mindset, and that's, you know, dogma isn't accepting of everything else. Like I said, they people that are stuck in that, you know, we've talked about in our episode, we did a couple episodes on this, and something we call the unconscious feedback loop. That would very much apply to certain belief systems and religions, that, you know, it's trauma-based mind control, and they keep people in an unconscious feedback loop, which, you know, they become more and more dogmatic, and eventually that leads to very extreme and dangerous behavior. And you see that with cults of all sorts of different types. That's not something that should be tolerated or, slapped on a bumper sticker as a beautiful thing. Like it's a very dangerous thing to do that if you're not looking at those belief systems that you're promoting from a very honest perspective. But yeah, I definitely, it definitely is a dogmatic belief system. And we've talked many times, Logan, and kind of associated Christianity with like a spiritual cancer, in the sense, that like cancer cells, they will just change and grow, rapidly and spread and just kind of destroy everything around them to the point that it'll eventually destroy the body and kill the body. And then obviously the cancer itself is obviously, it's just a self-defeating cycle.
Destroy the host.
Right, which again, like we were just talking, in that passage, St. Augustine was wondering about, why the Christians who have this one true God they split into many different sects, many different factions, that all kind of have their own interpretation and things like that. But yet they war not only with pagans and heathens, but amongst themselves. That's like a spiritual cancer.
Which I personally kind of interpret as the schism as a form of the correspondence principle playing out, that external manifestation of that internal fracturization of the self, of the psyche, of the ego that happens through trauma-based mind control. You're seeing that just like all these different denominations that all argue their version of the Bible, thinking they have the right one, even amongst other Christians. I mean, that's how subdivided from within that they are.
Right. Yeah. No. That's totally on point. You can absolutely see it. And that's how I see that. Obviously, one of the big themes we see on this channel is like where we see a lot of trauma started coming into our society and statism really started taking hold, was when these belief systems started, were forced upon our ancestors, and they started giving up their animist and pagan beliefs because they didn't really have a choice, or at other times it was beneficial for trading or whatever it may be. But going back and seeing where that schism is, that's where the trauma was inflicted on us, and where we became divided and lost from ourselves. We became cut off from our roots, and cut off from our ancestors and things. And then obviously, that then plays out, in the reality field as well, through all these different wars and, factions. And, even if you look through the history of the Dark Ages, you can see, like I said, there was, wars between Catholics and Protestants, or even, just wars between different countries that, even though they were still both countries were Catholic or both countries were Protestant or whatever have you, there's always this constant, split and this war being played out. So I like that you brought that point up. Another really interesting thing to kind of look at here is how really foundational fear is to Christianity. You have this God, this Jehovah, Yahweh, whatever have you, that is literally giving you commandments and then saying that if you don't do this, not only will you be punished, but your children will be punished. And even if you're wanting to look at the New Testament and, things from, the perspective of Jesus, if we go through there, it's still a very anti-sovereignty belief system. It's all about it's based off of the assumption that you needed saved in the first place. Like you were evil in the first place.
All the same book. Yet again,
right.
Yeah. It's like, well, I like this part of the book better. Yeah, but that Christianity is based on the Bible. It doesn't. You're already trying to subdivide. This is how the different denominations happen. Where, we're going to be a version of Christianity that focuses more on the Jesus teaching. Well, why is that? Oh, maybe because you think that maybe some of the Old Testament stuff is a little bit barbaric, but it was a different world. It was a different time. Things were different then. What was right and wrong any different though? That's
right.
the real question.
Yeah, exactly. That, so getting away from that, if you're going to look at things honestly, you can't just go through and like cherry pick, and ignore the things that you're like, oh, that's not, you know what I mean? You have to acknowledge that that's part of that belief system, and that there are, there may be sects that focus on other parts that may not be as barbaric, but there are also plenty of other sects that are very doom and gloom and apocalyptic. You see a lot of cults that have developed or come out of a Christian background, and they're waiting for the end times, and that it's just this very again, it's so fear based. There's the fear of punishment. There's the fear of, like, the end times. The apocalypse is going to happen. And Jesus is supposed to come back, and then there's Judgment Day. And it's, you can see it as a theme throughout the whole thing. So when you see a belief system has fear as a theme over and over and over again in it, you can really notice that it's not actually something that is a healthy mindset to have, or something that's coming from a place of loving other people. Like, if you're inherently believing that they're sinful or they're demonic just for being different than you, that's not a loving thing. Or even the idea that they need saved and they can't save themselves. That's very disrespectful to the person. That is how I would see it. It's very anti-sovereignty. So when you recognize fear as a pattern here, you can start to notice this belief system is something that is totally, it's a trauma-based mind control. It's a mind virus, and you can't look beyond those things, because something we talk about a lot when we talk about Christianity, we refer to it as the poison cup. If you're wanting to poison someone, you have to mix that poison with something sweet. And that's kind of what's happened with Christianity. It's everybody's told that, oh, it's this, this love and light, and it's about forgiveness, and, having a relationship with God and Christ, and, all of this. But then you see there's all these verses in the Bible that are about, how to treat your slave, or how to treat your wife, or you could go on and on of the different things in there that are just utterly barbaric. That's the poison, and if you just accept it and and drink that down, thinking that every cup, every religion has some truth in it, again, it's a very dangerous place to operate from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that poison cup analogy. Definitely on point there. And in the idea that if they don't drink from that poison cup, that they're going to die of spiritual thirst. Just drink from a pure source. Animism and having a true relationship with yourself and with nature, that is exactly what is meant to be the spiritual experience. Christianity and these other type dogmatic cult-like religions have literally hijacked Christians and other followers' spirituality using these methods. And we can see that ignorance and blind faith is literally the foundational virtue. And I mean virtue as in they're proud of it. This verse here from Proverbs 3, verses 5 and 6. Trust in the Lord with all of your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your path straight. So don't rely on your own faculties. Don't try to understand things. Just follow it. Just obey and submit to him, and then he will make your path straight. So there's that learned helplessness that, come wipe my ass for me because I'm not a grown-ass adult, that kind of thing. I mean, it is really despicable, and I'm just going to come out and say that. We should not respect a belief system like this. It's pathetic. It's dehumanizing.
Yeah, I mean, that really just says it. Like, obviously, we talk about sovereignty and freedom, and free will and awareness being really the foundational pillars of the entire universe, of our entire experience. And this is something that is literally saying, like don't lean on that. Like, you don't need your own understanding. Like, it's not you that can do it. You're too weak. It's this source that is outside of yourself. Pour all your psychic energy into this thing. Don't keep it for yourself. Like, that really will give you a clue to what Jehovah really is. You know,
I mean, the presupposition of that really is, think about this. So if God created us, then he gave us a brain, but he gave us a brain that's just smart enough to follow orders, to grovel at his feet and praise him and do everything he says, but not smart enough to really understand why that's good for us, or how to actually make informed decisions. Just do what the Bible, follow the rules and nothing will happen to you. I mean, it's
right.
ridiculous.
Well, and I think that's interesting to point out that, how obviously ignorance, like literally, like choosing to remain ignorant, like to not look at anything other than what your belief system has, that's a foundational pillar of Christianity. When Christianity really first started taking hold, it appealed to the extremely poor, the people that had the jobs that like no one else wanted. It appealed to slaves, because even though their life may have seemed miserable, it gave them this promise of this like beautiful afterlife if they just did whatever. So it became very appealing. So Christianity from its very start was based off of an appealing to people who were uneducated. Uh, and I'll go ahead and probably say this with offending a lot of people, but from my observation, it tends to be that same way today. Because when you have a belief system that you literally think you will go to hell, you'll be punished because you're reading something demonic, or you're reading an alternative perspective, you're never going actually to gain a holistic viewpoint because you're incapable of it. You're always going to be stuck in a dogmatic tunnel vision because your religion demands that. You know, so
Right.
that's an interesting thing to look at.
Right. The Lord works in mysterious ways, so to speak. Who are we to try to understand what those things are? Just do what you're told, and everything will be fine.
Right.
Again, with this sort of cancer concept of just make everything like the one, just sort of like monocropping, like we say. Um, my counterpoint to that is that no individual or religion or ideology or book or anything has the monopoly or the copyright on truth, because truth is true regardless of where it came from, who it came from, and it belongs to everyone because it is available through the human experience. Every person that is born or manifested, can come into incarnation, has that right, has that relationship with the universe to acquire and seek truth. And putting it all into this one little sort of compartmentalized source and saying like truth can only come from this book, and if it comes from anywhere else, it's at best misleading, at worst it's the devil or whatever. And that's just ridiculous. So even this idea that fundamentalist Christians that are just going to follow what teachings came directly from Jesus, well, why focus on one person? If truth is truth, he can't be the only wise person that ever said some of these things. There's been plenty of other natural law teachers or morality teachers that were saying, hey, treat people with respect and things like that. Why do we have to be so obsessed with this one guy and name ourselves after him? Like, I'm a Christian, like I've got to just wash myself all with this super righteous Jesus air. It's
Mhm.
something off about that.
Yeah, it definitely is interesting to observe in the sense, because again, like to me, looking at it from a magical perspective, that being very aware of your psychic energy, and your life force energy and where you're putting that. And if there's anything I've learned in my practice, it's all about going into the self, and really taking that and doing your work with it in your own self discovery. And that's where you really find that truth. This is a belief system that is telling you to put that utterly outside of yourself, and pour your psychic energy into this other being. That's like I said, that's something that I think is a very, very strong indicator. Like I personally operate from the idea or the understanding that Jehovah or Yahweh, is a demon or a few different demons. You know, and when you're thinking about that, you know, that brings a whole nother level of it. But you know, that we won't get too far into that or anything. So yeah, we can kind of like, you know, that again, we really wanted to highlight a lot of examples of why that belief system in particular is extremely destructive. Because again, it's been pushed, especially the main narrative about Christianity is this wonderful religion that has, you know, helped develop society and develop, you know, Western culture and, you know, all these different things. But, you know, I don't think that's really an honest look of it. So we wanted to make sure to highlight that.
So I guess that's going to conclude this episode. We decided to go ahead and do this in 2 parts. So this first one was kind of just digging into some of the fundamental aspects of Christianity and why it is that we particularly focus on that as an example of harmful mindsets that should ultimately be completely abandoned and forgotten about. But we're going to follow up with a second part next week on this same topic. And in that one, we're going to kind of get into a little bit of some other belief systems and concepts and ideologies that besides Christianity, and just kind of expand on that a little bit. So that's going to conclude the episode. I hope everyone enjoyed this. I hope you all found some value, and if so, please give us a like. We really appreciate that. And again, subscribe to the channel. We've got new episodes every week on this podcast, exploring a variety of different topics. We have interviews sometimes. And if you have not yet, please click the link below and check out our free initiation package, where we've put together a totally free video series teaching some basic techniques that you can begin to practice immediately, as well as a bunch of other goodies as well. Just click that link below, put in your email, and you also sign up to our email list, where we're starting to actually put out more free content there as well. So be sure to check that out. So yeah, guys, appreciate you guys watching, and join us next week. But until then, be empowered, be inspired, and be encouraged.